recognize the person I'm looking for is sitting right next to me. So, okay, so this is 4 complete strangers. I've never met any of them before.
Stranger than you think.
Yeah. So this panel is called "And the Endless Wars," and that's what we've been all about today. And again, right after this, if people can help clean up or whatever, I don't know how much cleaning up we have to do, but it would be great. And the church charges by the hour, believe it or not, so we want to be cleaned up as soon as possible and get out of here. But I just want to thank Poppy. Where's Poppy? Yay, Poppy, she's on our board of directors. Our other board members are Diane Moxley for March on the Pentagon. She's right, raise your hand, Diane. And Emma Friada, who's also on the executive board with me. We're the co-chairs. And Madeline Hoffman's back there, she's on the board. So we got all the board here except for one board member from Chicago who they couldn't make it today. So, and then the committee, stand up if you were on our committee. Sharon, David, I said stand up and you sat down. Stand up if you were on our committee. Yeah, no, there's more. I don't know, Jan was on the committee, and so yeah, it's just been a great couple of days. I'm very excited and re-energized. Okay, so what we're hoping for on this panel is to address the endless wars, but what are we doing to end the endless wars? And so we're just going to go down the line. So you can just, oh wait, no, I need the mic back, so I have to do the intros. So anyway, our first panelist is Lee Camp. And of course, people always say people need no introduction. And they say that about me, and then they go on to give like a 10-minute introduction. I wonder how long they talk if I didn't need one. And so Lee's just been a really good friend of ours in March on the Pentagon since we began. He has his own show, which is wonderful, on RT, correct? Am I correct? Okay. And just a wonderful left-wing voice, and we're very proud to have him here. I didn't get a card on you, so I'm just making all this shit up. Like, everything I said was true. I didn't make any of that stuff. So, here's Lee.
My resume was he's been a good friend to us. So, yes. I don't know if you got a hint from Cindy, but she needs to be in bed. The church charges by the hour. So let's freaking speed it up, people. I'm gonna do my best not to. I know I'm gonna do my best not to curse during this, but that's kind of my thing. So if I do, just know I really meant it. I do need you. Yes, I want you to duck down in front of the table and hold the mic. No. Alright, so I think that in a lot of ways we've basically undergone a military coup in this country. In the sense that there's really no oversight for the Pentagon any longer. In many ways. I mean, Congress is not declaring war anymore. So I see people covering their ears, yet apparently if I don't use the mic, people can't hear. So, you told me to curse first. I didn't even curse. I just know, I said Pentagon. Yeah, come here.
Raise your hand if you can hear me without the mic.
Testing. No?
Raise your hand.
All right. No, we're good. In a lot of ways, I've gone military coup. The Congress is no longer declaring war. They haven't done since the AU enacted freaking 20 years ago. They're not overseeing what's being done by our military. And the spending is simply out of control. And entire day. And so it's basically, like, in terms of our foreign policy, it's practically a military coup. And it's never talked about by the mainstream media. And and I think we need to call the Pentagon what it is. It's an organization of mass human murder. That is their job. It's an organized mass human murder machine. And you can argue about whether, well, we're a country and we need our mass human murder machine. All right, have that debate. Well, let's just call it what it is. It's an organized mass human murder. And in terms of the amount of money spent, it's completely unaccountable as well. Recently, we found out from Pentagon's own numbers that there's $21 trillion of unaccounted for adjustments at the Pentagon. 21 trillion. And I know some of you right now are thinking he means billion. No, I don't. 21 trillion with a T, all right? As in tits. And it's totally insane. If I get hit every time, $21 trillion, which is an unbelievable amount of money. To give you an idea of how much that is, there's $30 trillion in the stock market, in the entirety of the stock market. If you make $40,000 a year, in order to make $1 trillion, it would take you tens of millions of years. This is an unimaginable amount of money. And of course, every time we want to do something positive for our people, we want to give them health care, we want to give them fix our infrastructure, we want to give people public schools, they say, how are you going to pay for it? Where's the money going to come from? Yet for some odd reason, when we want to drop bombs, no one says, where's the money going to come from? What is the Pentagon going to have a yard sale? You know, how many VHS copies of Civic Slippers are they going to have to sell to afford the next war? It's never even a question. And the average, according to the Pentagon's own numbers, is we drop a bomb every 12 minutes. Every 12 minutes. Now, granted, those numbers are a couple of years old, so maybe they weren't really swinging for the fences, and now they've upped it a little. Maybe they've upped their game a little, more than just 1 every 12 minutes. And under Obama, it was once every 15 minutes. So it's gotten worse, but it's not that different. But back to the money for a second. The Pentagon was audited for the first time. Some of you guys paid attention to that effort. John came out last year. First time ever audited. It took over 2,000 auditors to audit our machine of mass human murder. And they came out, and what was this amazing conclusion they came to? The Pentagon failed the audit. That was what the Pentagon announced. We failed the audit. And their excuse for this horror show of unaccountability, their excuse was, don't worry, we expected to fail the audit. Okay, that covers it. Thank you for explaining that. And you might think with this much, this completely unaccountable, this many bombs being dropped, this much money just flying in and out, you'd think maybe there's some whistleblowers coming forward saying there's fraud here, there's terrible things going on here. Well, actually there are. If you look deep within a Pentagon report, in a footnote, you can find that over the past 5 years, they had 95,000 whistleblower complaints at the Pentagon. 95,000. You're thinking, he means 100. No, 1,000. No, 1,000. And of those 95,000, 1% were even investigated. They even looked into 1% of them. And of course, most of those they threw out. So it is just an unbelievable amount of fraud, an unbelievable amount of unaccountability, and it really amounts to a military coup in a lot of ways. And I think one of the most important things, and the reason maybe that there's a comedian up here at all, is because we have to shift the debate. We have to change the way we talk about it. And I think a lot of you know this. And I started with the terminology change at the beginning, not just saying Pentagon, not just saying Department of Defense, but saying organized mass human murder or organized mass human murder machine. Because nowadays that's what it is. Because we don't have good wars. A good war is one that's one of last option, absolute last option. But there's not even other option at all. When we bomb someone overseas based on a grainy photo on a video somewhere with a drone bomb, did we talk to them? Did we imprison them? Did we capture them? No, bombing was the first resort. That was the first idea. We've got no other ideas. And it's bombs being dropped by 18-year-olds in Tampa, pushing a button. I wouldn't trust an 18-year-old in Tampa to give me a haircut. And we're trusting them on the issues of life and death. So we've got to move this debate. We've got to change the way we talked about it. We've got, and here's the thing: is like killing is not our natural feeling, our natural desire. It takes billions of dollars and countless hours and thousands of channels and newspapers and magazines and websites to convince the people of America that war is the only answer. That we need to be dropping bombs once every 12 minutes. Because it goes against common sense, it goes against common dignity, it goes against compassion and empathy and love and friendship. It goes against all of those things that are not really talked about. It goes against everything that's deep within us. But it only takes a conversation to convince people the opposite side, to convince people to feel the things that they were born to feel. And so that's why it takes such an immense amount of propaganda to make this our norm, this okay, this our average, this our, habituate us to this catastrophe of imperialism. And I think that those conversations matter. I think that shifting the debate matters. I think shifting the terminology matters. And thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. You did a good job for not being right next to me. Or not even sitting there. You did a great job. And we asked him, because he was a comedian. He's famous. But he's on the right side of the issue, right? Right? We wouldn't have him here if he was like, that Jeff Dunham guy who has a puppets. God, I hate him. So anyway, right? So when he was saying no, you might think I meant billions. No, it's trillions. When I read how much Jeff Bezos owns $114 billion, I had to keep checking that number. That can't be right, but that's right. So I don't even understand that stuff. So our next speaker is the lady who sat next to this guy. So she's a very, very good friend of mine, Ann Wright. See, I was remiss. I know all these people really, 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 really well, and I have cards on them. But I was remiss. Get a card on you. And he is funny, but I don't like having somebody that's funnier than me. So, maybe that's why I didn't. Okay. Ann Wright was in the U.S. Army for 29 years, I know this by heart, and retired as a colonel. She was also a U.S. diplomat for 16 years in U.S. embassies in Nicaragua, Grenada, Somalia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. We need some more vowels in your embassies. Sierra Leone. What does that say? Micronesia, Afghanistan, Mongolia. She resigned. Wait. Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't get a card.
I know. She resigned from the U.S. government. I thought it said for the U.S. government. Well, you guys all know I am. In opposition to the war on Iraq. Then, okay, yeah. I want to say, the hardest working woman, one of the hardest working women in peace business, Ann Wright.
Well, thank you very much, Cindy. It's great to be here with all of you all. And Cindy and Medea and I all kind of go back many, many years. 14 years ago in 2005 when Cindy went to the outskirts of hell. That would be Crawford, Texas, when George Bush was living there at his summer house in Crawford, Texas, and Cindy said, I'm going to sit in a ditch here until George Bush comes out and tells me why this was such a great war, why this was the war that was necessary, and why her son ended up getting killed there. So since that time, we've all been on the road to trying to stop these wars, and many of you, Medea, much earlier than that, stopping all sorts of wars. That was while I was in the military, sorry. I got kind of the light a little bit late in life, as you can tell by that, but been trying to make up for lost time. But as we talk about how do we end these wars, you got me on that one because we sure as hell aren't doing a very good job of it. We keep electing these people that seem to think that wars are just fine. I mean, we think we are electing some, like Obama, who I thought when he was in the campaign was saying some pretty good things, but it didn't turn out that way. And in fact, when we really look at the people in our Congress that are saying, that are really standing up saying, we really need to watch out for these wars. There are very, very few of them that are doing that. And I think that's where Chris's comment earlier today about we need to really bird dog all of these candidates right now. We have an election very, very soon that's coming up, and we need to have all of these candidates telling us what they think about these wars. And if they don't tell us about it, that says something. But they won't tell us unless we get in their faces with it. So that's why going to these caucus meetings, going to the town hall meetings, is really, really important. If we don't do that work right now, we may be stuck again for another 4 years. Either with Trump or with somebody that may turn on us from the Democratic Party. Well, maybe not even turn. I mean, who knows what we're going to get? So it's time that we really pull out the stops and go after them and find out what their positions are on all these wars. Well, we've had a great panel that had 4 of the countries that the U.S. has been interfering with over the last years. Cindy talked about Afghanistan also. We've had references made to Iraq. We've had a comment on Iran. I just wanted to mention 2 other countries, though. The whole issue of what the U.S., the pressure the U.S. is putting on Russia. Now, that becomes very complicated because of all of the Russiagate stuff and all that sort of stuff. But starting with the Obama administration, the number of NATO exercises that are being held right on the border of Russia, the number of countries that have been siphoned off from the border of Russia that have been enticed to come into NATO. There's a good reason why the Russians are having exercises on their end of their side of the border. Is because they see a threat coming from NATO. If you look at all of the Eastern European countries and even in Scandinavia, countries that have never had military exercises with NATO before. If you look at Ukraine, a country that the United States has been trying to recruit into NATO, and you look at the issue of Crimea, which is the reason why the U.S. says it has sanctions on Russia right now for the annexation of Crimea. In fact, Michael, where are you right now? There he is back there. He just got back from Crimea. I was there 3 years ago, and it's a place that we ought to be going to, because when you talk to the people in Crimea, they say, we wanted to be annexed by Russia. We did not want to stay with Ukraine because the Ukrainian government was not treating us right. That they had, Russian language was no longer being used as a major language. There's a whole list of things that the people in Crimea were saying, we don't want to stick with Ukraine, and particularly after the U.S. orchestrated the coup in the Ukraine, bringing in a right-wing government. So that's one of the hot button issues that we have right now of these endless wars, and how do we stop them, and how do we get the U.S. government from orchestrating coups, attempting to orchestrate coups. We look at North Korea. Medea and I have both been in North Korea. We may be the only 2 in the room, although every now and then we're surprised. Has anybody else been? Michael. Good, Michael, I'm glad. We got to talk more, Michael. No, but the whole issue of North Korea. This is a time where about the only thing that I will give President Trump credit for is that he, against the advice of his advisors, against the advice of virtually everybody in the U.S. government, went ahead and met with Kim Jong-un. Not once, not twice, but then he stepped across the border into North Korea ever so slightly, Granted, these negotiations, I don't even think they're negotiations yet, but the fact that a U.S. president has at least reached out to North Korea's chief is very, very important. When we have been working on the whole issue of peace now for Korea, where it's the South Koreans, the 75% of the South Koreans want peace because, of course, they're the first one that are going to get obliterated if some idiot U.S. president decides that, oh, it's now time to take out the North Korean regime, which is still one of the policies of the U.S. government. I mean, it is still a written policy of the U.S. government that we want to have regime change in Nicaragua. Oh, yes, that's another one. In North Korea. The issues of who we are going to be elected and what policies they have, what they're willing to tell us at the time, whether it be on Russia, whether it be on North Korea. You know, even if Trump comes up with some sort of deal with North Korea, I mean, do you think the Democrats are going to do to him on North Korea what he did to the Democrats on Iran? On the nuclear deal on Iran? Well, I wouldn't put it past it at all. I wouldn't put it past the Democrats to try to undo anything that President Trump does with the North Koreans. So we really have to watch very carefully what each one of these contenders for the presidency of the United States has to offer. And then I'll just mention the other one that from Latin America that was not mentioned so far is Nicaragua. I was there with the Veterans for Peace delegation in July. And it's kind of the same sort of rhetoric that we've been hearing about all of these other soft regime change, soft coup sort of things. When you go to, I mean, first, let's just admit, any country that's ever had anything that has the term socialist or communist associated with it is going to live in infamy in the history of the politicians of the United States of America. There's no way in the world that they're going to dig out of that moniker, that there were a socialist revolution. And that's what I think is happening now to Nicaragua. Having been there and heard the stories of what happened last April, of the violence that occurred in what was the safest country in Central America, and how quickly violence erupted, particularly after the National Education for Endowment, the NED from the United States of America, spent millions of dollars training young kids on how to do social media. And all of a sudden, in a period of 3 days, over 100,000 social media posts were made about a young person, a university student, being killed in an anti-government demonstration. And then all of a sudden, social media erupted. All of a sudden, there were protests on the streets. There was violence in the streets. There were people in the streets committing violence that nobody knew. And then, following the violence of just rock throwing and things like that to provoke the police, all of a sudden, there were weapons on the street. Who got the weapons in the safest country in Central America? And who got killed by those weapons? There were a few Nicaraguan citizens that did, but the overwhelming majority were police. And the number of severe casualties that were not deaths, but severe casualties, were the police. In fact, the president of the country at one stage called all the police back to the barracks and said, "We'll show you who's causing the trouble here. The police are not on the streets," and the trouble continued. Trouble continued. So there's a lot that's happening around here that now more and more information is coming out about what U.S. involvement has been in these soft coup attempts. So keep your eyes open on more information that's coming out about Nicaragua. Nicaragua that is, the government is now the Sandinista government. I mean, and that, of course, is an anathema to the United States that caused the Contra War against the Sandinistas 40 years ago. None of them are pure and clean. There are all sorts of issues, but the issue of violence in that country was not the one to be put on the Sandinistas, in my opinion. where in the period that they've been in power, over 12 years now, they have had over 18 new hospitals, they have new schools, they have new roads, I was there, my first assignment as a diplomat was in Nicaragua 30 years ago. And let me just tell you, the difference in it, and from what people have told me that have been going to Nicaragua for a long period of time, the great difference has been in the last 12 years that the Sandinistas have been in power. But because it is the Sandinistas, they are up ship creek as far as the United States is concerned. So, as we talk about how to end endless wars, let's go after the politicians. Let's make them tell us what they stand, where they stand on wars, and if they don't stand where we need to them, bring them along. It may be gently at first, but they need to be brought along so that we can finally elect some people we can trust to stop these damn wars. Thank you.
You can go to marchonpentagon.com and see our open letter to Donald Trump, basically saying, you're tweeting all this stuff, quit tweeting, you're the one that has the power to bring the troops home, and it's, it can't be done by a tweet, it has to be done by an order, because he's the commander-in-chief. So you can go see that too. I mean, we don't have any confidence in these bougie politicians, but we do have confidence if the people get to know what the situation, and we can rally around and work together. And that's what happened when I went to Camp Casey. People were like, oh, there's someone that feels the same way I do, and so that's what we're trying to do, educate people, rally people around the cause. Okay. So thank you, lady next to that guy. I think my ponytail's too tight. I had the ponytail for like 10 hours, so it's cutting off.
And it's
And it's past my bedtime. Don DeBar is our next one. He's the guy next to the lady who's next to the guy. And he's a radio journalist and lifelong anti-war activist based in New York. He's a frequent commentator on international affairs in such global media as RT and Press TV. Don hosts a daily 30-minute newscast, which is, I don't know, it looks like card. Carried on dozens of terrestrial stations. Oh my God, and the internet at communitypublicradio.org. And you know what he did not write, which is the most important role in the world? He is the engineer for Cindy Sheehan's soapbox. What the hell, Ron?
Choo Choo Charlie was an engineer also. Thank you. First of all, this has been an awesome 2 days. Yesterday, doing our Stations of the Cross, or Stations of the Pentangle, I guess, we were doing from White House to the Washington Post and everything in between. I don't know how many people we were, 100, 150 something. Hung tough, made a big noise, people saw us, everybody going by was stopping to take film. It really made an impression, and the signs and everything made this, the message very clear. I think we reached a lot of people yesterday, a lot. And that's an important part of building to accomplish what we're talking about, which is to put an end to these endless wars. It's cliche, but if we don't put an end to the endless wars, they're going to put an end to us. You can see the dynamic that's involved with the expense of maintaining the military, the global military empire, essentially, that hollows out the global economies, it's hollowing out the planet itself. The Pentagon, the largest consumer of fossil fuels that you'll ever meet in a dark alley, larger than 140 nations, I think, in terms of its carbon footprint. Of course, designed not to transport people or to bring food or housing or any other, economic benefit, but to kill. We pay this enormous expense so that if it's fully expressed, it exterminates life on the planet. The weaponry exists, has been constructed, delivered, and deployed to do this. This has been an ongoing project of the United States since it became the United States and before. Today's Columbus Day, quote unquote, the traditional one. In 1492, this war began here. People came from Europe and they started to steal the land, murder the people, drag other people over to develop it, and a very small set of the people that set this thing in motion got the benefit of it, the major benefit of it. A lot of our brothers and sisters across the board were, I guess, compradors in one way or another. We got, college paid for maybe, or got to buy a house, or had some other small benefit, and thought, well, that other stuff's not my business. And we went along for 100 years, maybe 150 years. That has started to dry up. This monster gets exceedingly hungry. It's eating everything in its path. It's eating the savings and equity of the middle class in this country. It's eating the union jobs in this country. It's eating a whole lot of other stuff, and it's going to eat us if we don't put a stop to it. Yep. But how do we do it? I think everybody here agrees with that. Yeah. And so the task is, of course, how. We can march, we can meet, we can talk and exchange ideas. These are all very important. We're looking at power arrayed in a way that it has never been in the history of our species. And we're looking at an imperialism that is, advanced a century and change beyond what Lenin looked at, in 1916, 1917, when he did his famous piece, Lenin, the highest stage of capitalism. The whole class structure has changed since then. You have now like a global economy that was envisioned maybe by some people 100 years ago, but not by very many, and certainly not the center of discussion or the point from which people proceeded to have a conversation when they critique military, war, imperialism, etc. We have to understand where power lies and how it behaves, and basically how we can interact with it from the margins, because at best, at the moment, we're at the margins. When you go back to February 15, 2003, largest anti-war demonstration in the history of planet Earth. It didn't slow the war down, excuse my language, a fucking minute. Not a minute! And what happened? What happened was instead the anti-war message that was expressed was by the November 2004 election repositioned into anybody but Bush, with our side backing a candidate who brought us what we have now. That was John Kerry that ran against Bush. It was John Kerry that was the Secretary of State for the second term of Barack Obama. That was John Kerry that was the Secretary of State cleaning up in Libya and also helping before that happened. The whole Syrian episode, where do you want to go? You want to go to what's been happening in Venezuela since 2011? What's been happening in DR Congo since 2011? What's been happening across Africa, West Asia, Latin America? Kerry's right in there. Not a solution to the problem that we were protesting on February 15, 2004. This is something that we have to keep in mind also when we're going to these politicians with questions. Bernie Sanders. Hugo Chavez. Who was Hugo Chavez, Bernie Sanders? A then communist dictator. Those are his words. Those are his words. This is not going to be our savior on this point. We have to find ways of leveraging the power that we have to force a change in policy. That requires first understanding the moment. At the moment, globally, this system is in crisis. Evidence of that in this country was the 2016 election. Aside from the fact that we got Trump at the end, that's not the crisis. That's not the catastrophe either. Okay, the fact that Bernie and Trump rose up unexpectedly was an indication of the crisis being felt on the ground. There's a working class crisis that was expressed where people stood in the 2016 election. In the Democratic Party, Sanders represented a solution as opposed to Clinton, who was business as usual. In the Republican Party, Trump represented a solution as opposed to business as usual. You notice that there was a Bush running. He couldn't get any traction. I went to both conventions. At the RNC, I'm asking people, why are you voting for Trump? He's not exactly anti-abortion or anti-gay like your Christian Republicans are. They said, I voted over these things before. He said, I'm going to get a job. That's what I'm voting for. And you bet the same thing was going on with Sanders. You had all these places, industrial, post-industrial America, people out of work, looking for some assistance, and a system that doesn't respond. At the same time this was happening, also standing up in place of working class, Black Lives Matter protests, hardcore stuff going on, Standing Rock, all over the country. It was an open rebellion with no leadership. The problem was there was no leadership because there's no unitary vision, no understanding of the moment. And how do we take what we have arrayed and leverage it and beat this thing until it comes down? That's what we have to work on. And it requires really taking a careful look at the moment. And I'm going to finish with this, because this is the moment that I see. I see the FBI, CIA, and 17 other flavors of intel agencies, the leadership of the Democratic and Republican parties, the bulk of the Congress, go back to Korea and Iran, for example, just to make sure Trump didn't try to make peace with Korea or Iran or Russia. Congress, sui sponte, on its own initiative, decided 2 years ago now or whatever, to have a vote to add more sanctions on this without Trump proposing anything, and then came back with, I think, 9 dissenters out of 535 members of Congress. So the political institution is in bed also. You have intel agencies, politicians, leadership of both parties, and the media, and the bulk of corporate America, all on one side. I'm sorry, which side am I supposed to be on again? If you're going to fight imperialism, the first thing you do is fight it. You guys are over there, bam! You look and see who's standing next to you, and that's your ally for the moment you're standing there. And have it done on them, because they start acting up.
Okay, I just want Medea, you win the award for the best card of the night. I can read your card and just put my glasses on. Yeah, I know. Medea, short and sweet. I won't say anything else. Medea is co-founder of Code Pink and author of several books, including recent books on Saudi Arabia and Iran. So Medea Benjamin.
Well, I think I should have gone before Don because he's talking about the big picture and overthrowing the machine, and I was going to go into some nice little things that we can do here and there as part of this, trying to make the machine a little bit better. Believe me, I know it's a horrible machine that we have to totally overthrow. But what do we do as we're building? And let's face it, we do not have an anti-war movement. You can't call what we have a movement. We have small groups of people. We cannot call out large numbers of people. You say nothing changed when we got all those people, millions of people around the world out in Iraq. I disagree. You said not a fuck. So I disagree because I think when we get people out like that, it changes the way that people in power think about the next invasion. And I would say one of the reasons we did not get Hillary Clinton as a president is because there was a huge anti-war backlash against her vote for the Iraq War, and I think she would have gotten us into more wars. And one of the reasons that Donald Trump has not gotten us into more wars is because he understands. Just like after Vietnam, they called it the Vietnam Syndrome, which is Vietnam fatigue. People did not want to get in more wars. We're in the same situation right now. There was a poll done recently that said, asked how many people wanted the get involved militarily to support Saudi Arabia in a potential war against Iran. You know what the results were? 13%. That's nothing. 13%. The American people, left, right, up, down, rich, poor, whatever it is, they don't want to get in more wars. In fact, they want to end the wars. But what's really weird is when Trump does a couple of things that would lead us in that direction, you get the Democrats yelling and screaming, oh no, we don't want to talk to Kim Jong-un, he's a dictator, and let's make it even harder by saying we can't stop the military exercises that would help those negotiations, or we can't pull troops out of South Korea. So Democrats are usually just as bad as the Republicans. There are some exceptions when it comes to the two-party war machine. Some of the things that we can do, very small level. We have people in here who have traveled to these countries, and then you're able to come back and talk about them with first-hand experience. And that is so important because the media doesn't tell us what our government is doing around the world, and they certainly don't cover the gross effects of economic warfare that this administration is waging. We heard about it in many places today. One other place I think we must talk about is Iran, where the economic warfare is used as a way to, that Trump says he's going to get them back to the table to sign a new agreement. And he obviously does not understand the Iranian people, the Iranian government. We have some people from Iran here that understand when you squeeze Iranians, whether they like their government or don't like their government, they stand up and say, no, we will not be humiliated like that and be forced back to the table. So we have a trip as Code going to Iran next week. We have a trip going to another place where the sanctions are really having more of a bite than before, and that is in Cuba. The sanctions have existed since 1961, but now, with Trump in power, they're even tightening those sanctions. And Terry, who's sitting in the back there, is the organizer of a trip we have coming up on December 18th. And there are still some spaces available on that if you want to go. I don't know if you've seen some of the footage. You won't see it on the mainstream media of the long lines now for people trying to get gasoline because they're trying to stop the Venezuelans from even being able to ship Venezuelan oil to Cuba. It's horrible the way economic warfare is being used right now. Some of the other things that we can do, a lot of us in this room have been working hard to try to stop the U.S. participation in the Saudi war in Yemen. This is another area that is not covered by the U.S. media, that is not showing us the catastrophic results of this war. But despite that, we have managed to put together a quite extraordinary coalition of organizations, of groups, of people that would normally never sit in a room together. And I'm talking about, like, from Code Pink to Freedom Works, Code Pink to the Koch brothers, Code Pink to the Cato Institute. We have groups coming together, left and right, libertarian, to say we don't want to participate in this war in Yemen. We also have the huge humanitarian community that sees the results of this devastating war and has also been involved. And because of the strong roots, grassroots movement, in addition, not the Congress people caring a whit about all the dying people in Yemen. You'd think when a school bus was bombed and 40 kids were incinerated that maybe Congress would say enough. No, it took the killing of Khashoggi, a journalist for the Washington Post, a horrible, brutal killing, for many of the people in Congress, including some Republicans, to say enough is enough. And that's when we got votes in Congress, both the Senate and the House, to say, stop supporting the Saudi war in Yemen. So far, when those have gone to the desk of Donald Trump, he has vetoed them. But we still have other ways to do it. We have an amendment now to the military funding bill that we're trying to get in there. And I think this is a good example of us trying desperately to do our job as American people to say how disgusted we are at our weapon sales to Saudi Arabia and the ties that the U.S. has had to the Saudi regime for decades that have been strengthened by the Trump administration. The other thing that we are getting a little bit of traction on, and thanks to some people in this group here, is an issue that Lee has talked about and Don talked about, which is just the grotesque amount of money that we are pouring into the Pentagon year after year after year. And I am encouraged that this year, some other groups that are not the usual suspects are starting to get involved in talking about the need to dramatically cut the Pentagon's budget. For example, you might have seen that the Poor People's Campaign, a group that is focusing on domestic issues, has taken up the Martin Luther King call of the triple evils of poverty and racism and militarism. And they've added the environmental destruction into that. But in the militarism part, Reverend Barber, who is one of the key leaders of this movement, has really immersed himself in the militarism issues and has given some wonderful talks, brought these issues out to audiences that normally wouldn't hear about it, and is calling for a dramatic reduction of $350 billion. That's almost half of the Pentagon budget if you don't count all the other things that really should be counted in the Pentagon budget, and calling for $350 billion cuts. There are other groups that haven't been involved, like Public Citizen, which is a very strong group in this country. They're calling for much smaller reductions, $100 billion, but it's important that they're calling for this. And going to all of the different candidates and the candidate staff. And I know Pocky is involved in going to these meetings and having very deep discussions with the candidates about how this is actually something the American people want. And there is polling done. The results, they haven't shown them yet, but I've heard it's very good polling. And we have given these ideas to some of these pollsters to look at some of the areas where there would be a lot of support for cutting the Pentagon budget. And one area that is polled extremely well is cutting the foreign military bases. You know that we have over 800 foreign military bases around the world. People have been fighting in their countries against those bases, and it turns out that there's almost no constituency in the United States for those foreign military bases. And so that's a good place to call for $100 billion of savings for us, the taxpayers. And the last thing that I want to talk about is we mentioned intersectionality. And I also said we don't have an anti-war movement. Where is there a movement right now around the climate? It's a real movement. It's a movement that has young people. It's a movement that has people of color. It's a movement that has people around the world. It's a movement where the folks who are really the victims of this, and every day we have new victims, just like in the fires in California right now, are now getting involved and in a very dramatic kind of way. There was a lot of disappointment that Greta Thunberg didn't win the Nobel Prize, but I think that her bringing these issues up in just such an amazingly genuine and human way has ignited a whole new generation of people to stand up. So our job is to do the educational work of saying you can't address the climate issue without addressing militarism, and you'll never find the money needed to invest in the Green New Deal unless you take it from the Pentagon budget. So we're doing that educational work. I just did a piece that was 10 ways that the climate and militarism are connected, and that piece is now, I've never had so much success in a long time in a piece like that because it's getting reprinted. I just had heard from Greenpeace that they're putting it out. Many of the environmental groups are putting it out. It's being translated into other languages. So again, people are hungry for this information. You might have heard that there was unfortunately another activity that was going on yesterday at the same time with Jane Fonda at the Capitol announcing that for the next 4 months she has moved here to highlight this issue of the climate, get other famous people coming every week to do civil disobedience. And on November 8th is the day to make the connections between militarism and the climate. We want to show that we can get more people out on November 8th than any other Friday, because each Friday has a theme to it. So let's take this as a challenge, that on November 8th we get lots and lots of people out outside the Capitol at 11 11 a.m. outside of the Capitol. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Medea, for giving us a strong call to action. No, because now I'm going to be standing up, because it's Q&A. So, one of my best memories of Medea is when we cuddled in the tombs to stop from freezing that one night when we got arrested in New York City, right? It was so cold. We were like on one corner of a mat, and we were like cuddling so we wouldn't freeze to death. So, why don't we come up here if you want to make a comment, and I will take the mic to... Ann and I have so many special moments, I couldn't even... I probably wouldn't even want to talk about them in public. So. Okay. So we want to come to the white paper, remember?
Here? Where are you? Stand on this.
All right. In the past couple of weeks, we've been seeing a lot of coverage of what appears to be a color revolution / regime change, although they're not going to overthrow a regime of 1.4 billion people, around China. And there's been a media blitz covering everyone from Republican senators to gamers who have all been indulging in anti-China rhetoric that has even crossed over into outright yellow pro-racism. Anyway, I'm wondering about your observations of the new focus of imperialism to Asia, especially to China.
I'll let one of them get into the details of China if they want to, but one of the most hilarious things I find about our mainstream media is how they're basically not covering what's going on in Ecuador or Haiti right now with these massive protests and fleeing the capital and all this stuff. And meanwhile, each day that a Hong Kong protester held up a strongly worded sign that got front page coverage in the New York Times. So the way they cover these, which countries they cover, is just completely and obviously tied to which country we are, basically at a Cold War with, or hoping to hurt, hoping to harm, hoping to bring down their government or at least weaken them. And meanwhile, on the other side of things, you can have these mass movements that just get no coverage at all, and just completely ignored in Haiti, for example. So it's just incredibly hypocritical and obvious of our media.
And I'll just say that America always needs an enemy. In fact, if we can have 3 or 4 of them, that justifies the big defense budget, military budget. But you look at warfare, and I'd say the old Chinese are winning. The economic warfare that they are doing right now, they are winning hands down. They have projects all over the world. People like them. They may not like them 20 years from now or whatever, but right now they're doing great. The Belt Road project, where for 20 countries throughout Asia, all the way up to Europe, we're getting all sorts of needed projects. On the military side of it, the Chinese have like 1/10 of the military budget. They're not about to try to confront the United States military-wise, but boy, economically, they're winning.
One of the things that we, I don't say learned, but one of the things that was pointed out to us over the last year from Russian President Vladimir Putin was that it costs a hell of a lot less to build weapons that are defensive in nature than it does to build weapons to control and dominate the planet. And so he had more or less introduced some products that they developed that were hypersonic weapons, drones that could go underwater and hit targets to the United States and such. saying these are not the kind of things that would allow us to attack you and win a war, but if you mess with us, we're going to be blowing some stuff up in the United States. China has been throwing money into its military. It's like $240 billion, I think, last year, was supposedly, according to the CIA, as opposed to the 700 and change billion nominal U.S. military budget. Again, it's $21 trillion, it's a lot more than that. They steal most of it before it even leaves the bank, but anyway, and the point of their weapons development and of their military strategies, again, defensive, they don't need to go out into the world and conquer territory in the European, fashion of imperialism. Their game plan, their operating mode is to go places where there are people that have things that they need, to sit down and reach a deal with them that will leave both parties enriched at the end of it so that it's sustainable, and try to construct from that global networks. Well, they have both the wherewithal to deal with it and confidence enough in their model, with good cause, that up until very recently, with the U.S. meddling again in Latin America, they were looking at planning, putting on the board, starting funding for the canal in Nicaragua, deep water ports on both sides of South America, transcontinental railroad in South America, a transcontinental railroad in Africa, which actually is under construction somewhat, maybe about a quarter constructed already, and kinds of infrastructure development that would be appropriate for 21st, 22nd century global trade under their model. The United States makes plans for global war, whether it's with nuclear weapons or with or the kind that we're looking at. Those are the two models. So of course the U.S. has got a problem with China and is being pursued. The last president, by the way, had to pivot to China, so there's something's been ongoing.
Okay, Rick, can we come up to the magic spot here? Here you go.
Rick Hohensee, president by amendment.com. Thank you. Very briefly, a question to the Colonel. What percentage of our military budget is the correct number?
Oh, the question is what percent of our budget should the military budget actually be? 1%? We definitely can cut it by a heck of a lot and still have the means to defend ourselves rather than offend others.
That is that one thing. The UN estimates that it would cost $30 billion a year to end world hunger. $30 billion. We spend about $1 trillion, if you count the black budgets and everything, on our military every year. So we could easily end world hunger for a year, each year. And guess what? That would make us a pretty secure country because no one wants to bomb the country that ended world hunger.
Also, Jeff Bezos could feed the world for almost 4 years, right?
Now I have two questions. Rick, are you going to have, when you become president, are you going to have Ann Wright as your military advisor? Excellent.
Barbara Lee is going to be Secretary of Defense.
Right on.
Ask her.
So this question is for Medea Benjamin. On November 8th, I have a dental cleaning appointment. Do you think I should reschedule or stick with this?
Reschedule.
Oh, cold.
Somebody working in an extraction.
I want to say Ty was marvelous as our sound master. So much fun.
Bring your dentist to the protest.
I'm Ms. Medea. operating independently in that respect. If we do have sort of a mass anti-war movement within the United States, how do you think we can inspire sort of that same movement across like these new sort of right-wing fascist states that have accrued so much capital and power over their people to like, I don't know, squash any opposition?
Yes? Can you make it brief?
You know, we're kind of at that moment, really, in development history. Thank you. You know, we're looking at going from a unipolar to a multipolar model, and this is something that Trump's foreign policy, and if you look at Korea, for example, has some implications. If you had a fulfillment of the promises, or at least the suggestions, of where that could go, a unified Korea as an independent actor in Asia, with Japan in charge of its own self-defense. I mean, these imply, I think, the United States withdrawing from occupying both of those places, which has been, you know, since 1945. A whole different dynamic in that area that includes risks like this. You're going to have suddenly lots of players instead of one dominant player, and all of them are armed. So there's a cart and horse problem that's going to have to be looked at. Do we have first total global disarmament, and then the United States doesn't get to be the boss anymore? I think that we don't live through that scenario, but if we don't have something approaching, you know, an overall reduction in arms, then we're going to be looking at some, you know, wars that could scare us. It might not be global, but the impact could be.
It's also quite remarkable how much Trump has created this space for the leaders around the world to be like Trump. And in addition, how much he has been pushing other countries to spend more on the military. And that has been horrible. I mean, you look at the efforts to get the NATO countries to, quote, pay their fair share. It's tremendous pressure that is being put to bear on those countries. And he's doing this around the world. So if we managed, I know you might not think Bernie Sanders is the savior, but I would love to see Bernie Sanders in the White House, because I think we would have a very different foreign policy, and we would not be pushing countries around the world to spend more on their militaries.
One quick question on that point.
Trump made a statement the other day about these regime change wars being bad, millions of people killed, all this other stuff, trillions of dollars needs to change, etc. Did Sanders respond to that?
Well, I think Sanders has responded to that in his platform, in the foreign policy speeches that he has given, and he has come out and said that U.S. troops should not be overseas. He said that U.S. should spend way less on the Pentagon. I agree with whoever said that he has not done, even in his own state, he calls for the F-35s to be based there, and that's a shame. But I think his foreign policy is way better than any other of the candidates. Tulsi Gabbard has a good talk about cutting the war machine, but you look at her votes, and she has voted for it, whereas Bernie Sanders has not.
I just want to clarify something. We are a nonpartisan movement, a bipartisan war machine, and we can't endorse any candidate, let alone a Democrat, Republican. So I just want to say that that's the personal views of the panelists, and I have my own personal views. Believe it or not, I have an opinion also. I know, it's so weird. It's really weird.
Okay, so we've talked some about Saudi Arabia, we've talked some about Yemen, we've talked some about Iran. What about the announcement from Trump the other day that he's sending 3,000 troops to Saudi Arabia to fight Iran, and that Saudi Arabia is going to pay for that? What do we do? Can we stop that? We must stop that unless it's just a red herring, but we have to do something.
perfect question for Medea. I mean, the United States, I'm not a panelist, and my ponytail's too tight, but the United States, the only thing it manufactures is war, weapons of war, right? And diabetes, type 2 diabetes. So, of course, like if you make ice cream, you're going to want to sell ice cream, right? So that's just the insidious part of but Medea is going to be a perfect person to talk about Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, because just as there has been a very strong campaign to boycott the apartheid state of Israel, so we need a strong campaign to boycott the misogynist, repressive, absolute monarchy, horrendous regime of Saudi Arabia. And in the beginning, a lot of us were scratching our heads saying, well, what can we boycott? What do they have that we can boycott? And as we looked into it, there are a lot of things that we can boycott, and we would love your help to do it. For example, now there are many companies in the United States that are taking money from the Saudis. And it's not just companies, think tanks that Sydney railed against. We have to embarrass them for taking Saudi money, and 2 of them have already been so embarrassed they've stopped taking it. It's the Brookings Institute and Middle East Institute. Ivy League colleges, we have to embarrass them for having entire wings and law schools named after these repressive Saudi monarchs. There are investment gatherings in Saudi Arabia where we have to shame the people just for going to that. And we did it last year on something called the Future Investment Initiative, and that is happening again at the end of October, and we have to shame the companies so that they will boycott and not go. We've had successes. There's a talent company now that they've opened up for, quote, entertainment in Saudi Arabia. A talent company called Endeavor just canceled a $400 million contract with the Saudis because they were embarrassed about working with this regime. And just like we've been successful in Israel of getting entertainers to not go to perform in Israel, so we must focus on the new entertainers that are now being invited to Saudi Arabia. And already we have had success with one entertainer, Nicki Minaj. And whoever of you know who Nicki Minaj is, you would wonder why the hell would the Saudis ever invite Nicki Minaj to Saudi Arabia? Not only does she kind of come out of her costumes in a very revealing way, but her songs are very, very explicit sexual songs. But anyway, when she was put pressure on her, she said she looked into it and realized that the Saudi Arabia regime, their policies towards gay people, which means beheading them, the policies towards women, which means throwing them in prison if they speak out, would not allow her to go to Saudi Arabia. There are socially responsible companies like Lush Cosmetics, have you heard of them? That have stores in Saudi Arabia, so we go to their stores and give educational leaflets out and ask their managers to say, we think your company should not be working in Saudi Arabia. There are many, many ways to get involved in this boycott campaign.
What about the troops, though?
Oh my goodness. Uber and Lyft both take millions of dollars of Saudi investments, and so we've been putting pressure on their boards of directors. And somebody said about the troops.
Why can we just come out straight and say we can't send the troops there?
Well, we do. We come out straight and say don't send the troops.
3,000 that he just announced a couple of days ago to prepare for war against Iran.
Right. Well, we have certainly come out and said we don't want any troops in Saudi Arabia. That if you remember what 9/11, one of the issues of Osama bin Laden was U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia. And now you're putting, and one of the things that George Bush quietly did was close down U.S. bases in Saudi Arabia. Obama opened one of them again, and now Trump is sending more troops. So we should definitely be saying no troops. But you know, we have a lot more these days, a lot more ability to put pressure on non-governmental entities have something in Code Pink we call extreme lobbying, and we would invite you to come with us, which is not just going there and nicely asking them to not be selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, but actually taking over their offices, doing die-ins, those kind of things. So we need to do all of those things, but I think joining a boycott campaign against Saudi Arabia is a very appropriate thing to do.
Well, and Medea mentioned George Bush, finally recognizing that Osama bin Laden did say it's those troops that you have in Saudi Arabia that are one of the reasons that they did the 9/11. Well, speaking of George Bush, guess who is the amateur artist George Bush now? He's an artist. Well, he has 66 portraits of U.S. military veterans that are now on display at the Kennedy Center, and it's called Portraits of Courage. Well, portraits of courage are the people that he's killed, and nothing to say about the people of Afghanistan and Iraq and all of the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that have died because of the actions of that warmonger, that war criminal. So tomorrow at noon, if you would like to join us at the Kennedy Center at their new exposition place called The Reach, at noon we will be protesting the warmonger and the Kennedy Center that is facilitating a war criminal.
Great. So, yes, Mitchell? I know everybody's names.
Except for the panelists.
So I was just going to ask why you guys think we kind of stopped government at representative democracy, and why with the invention of the internet and other technologies such as blockchain, why we aren't looking towards more direct forms of democracy, where the citizens can vote to impeach and repeal bills, and even, veto acts at work.
Because the ruling elite don't want that at all. And this is nothing new. This has been the American experiment from the beginning. When we were first founded, they were speaking the number of people that could vote was 6% of the population, white landowning males. And that's been the design from the beginning, and they've been pressured to allow more people to vote, and eventually they succumb to a lot of it, but then they find new ways to suppress. And the number of ways that our election system is rigged is insane, and the idea that the 4 Russian Facebook ads was what swung the last election is friggin' ridiculous. And there's so many ways that it is a completely corrupt electoral system, and they don't want direct democracy, and we should keep fighting for it, because as Medea said earlier, the American people don't want these wars, and often it's 13% that are supporting various military incursions. And so if we had actual democracy, we would not see at least this number of wars and bombing and killing.
It's a question of sequencing. If you had to go use the men's room, you go inside and walk into the room, you have a series of things you execute, you go to the bathroom, flush, and come out. If you unzipped your fly last, that would be a different outcome than the one with the usual sequence of events that you take. Here, the sequence is first revolution, then democracy. That's basically the deal. It's not time yet. We have to take that from them and take it back, so then we can decide how to live ourselves.
Hey, the name of our summit, Anti-Imperialist Revolution Summit. Wait, this is our last commenter. Sorry, we're running out of time, so our last question, commenter.
Okay, just partly in response to that, I would say to have a revolution, there has to be empowerment of people, there has to be broader democracy to get there. And so speaking in that, we're talking about being proactive in the situation. I think it is important to make war an issue in the elections, but I think it's also important that that we give voice to the people themselves. Because the U.S. goes around saying they're speaking in the name of the people, and we all know they're not. The people are anti-war, and they're anti-direction of the country in general. So I think people need to be able to speak in their own name, address what their concerns are. Those of you with radio shows have an opportunity to allow for speak-outs, to have people do that, and various other ways in terms of house meetings or things like that. I think it's very important that we use a period of the elections for the people to address their concerns and speak out in their own name as a way to move in an anti-war direction. And then more generally, I think we as a movement, being proactive, our aim, which is more than just being against war. What are we for? So we, as put forward that we're for an anti-war government, a peace economy, and a democracy where we decide. And I think that's a general direction that we could talk about as something that we could all mobilize around and take up. You know, we could figure out a campaign, but I think to broadly unify the various forces, we need our proactive aim and direction in the situation. And so I'd just like to comment on that.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this is a good question I'm going to let each panelist up here. So let's start with Medea and go back this way. So just make it like a final comment. Jesus Christ.
One of the campaigns we have as Code Pink, which is an ongoing long-term one, is building a peace economy. And what does peace economy look like? How do we divest from the war machine so that we can invest in a peace economy? And of course, as you all know, what a peace economy would look like is we would put that money into the Green New Deal, we would put that money into college, free college for everybody who wants it, we would put that money into Medicare for all. We know what kind of society we want to live in. It's just a huge shift in the way we're spending our money right now, and the kind of more community building that we want to build in terms of how we want to live our lives. So if you go to divestfromwarmachine.org or to the Code Pink website, you can see that campaign, and there's things that you can do in your local community. And right here in Washington, D.C., we are calling on the city of Washington, and Pocky is leading this, to divest, to call for divesting from the war machine and investing in the peace economy. We can do that all over the country.
Very short and clip because it was actually a response to a question. The question was, why don't we have that? And my answer was essentially, the sequencing is, we're going to need a revolution before we get that. Now, that doesn't mean we can't envision where we want to go. You have to do that. But if you look at revolutionary periods before and successful revolutions, the list of demands may be very long, but the unitary program is generally very short. Peace, land, bread, things like that. That's kind of a vision that we have to extend. All the people that are in here, I see this, you see that, he sees that. We have to find the common things there, very simple, and put that forward as a platform. But we're not going to get to them until we have the revolution, so we have to be looking at that too.
Well, my last comment is don't give up. We are in it together. We've got lots of allies. We know what's right for our world, and let's just keep moving on it and kick some butt.
She means kick some ass. Well, I'll get the self-promotion thing out of the way. If people want to keep hearing me yell at them, linkcamp.com is when I go for that. But in terms of answering the question, yes, I think that we talked a lot about what's wrong and how to get angry about that and how to stand up against that. In terms of creating a better world, in terms of the positive angle, I agree with what they said. You need to envision how you want it. You need to start building that stuff. I thought recently the economist Richard Wolff was talking about how before capitalism, when things were feudal, capitalists vestiges of feudalism and then grew up. And so now to get beyond that, we need to build those sparks, those things that are beyond the profit motive, that are true democracy, true representative, and you build those things in very small ways.